Awesome. So before we begin, I would like to share a brief land acknowledgement. As a settler on this land and on behalf of NEADS, I would like to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are calling in from today. Our so-called Canada is built upon the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. These unceded and unsurrendered lands were often taken through violent, non-consensual means, and colonial violence persists in our society today. We stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island as they fight for their rights, representation, and recognition. With many of us being settlers on this land, it is crucial that we recognize our positions within oppressive structures and our roles and responsibilities towards reconciliation. Land acknowledgements like these are only a very small part of the lifelong, individual, and constantly evolving journey we must all take as we strive to improve relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. To learn more about the land you're on, a link to native-land.ca will be posted in the chat box below. Elizabeth, back to you.
Thank you so much, Carly. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. My name's Elizabeth Moeller, and I am a research coordinator with NEADS, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Carly Fox, Junie Gooden, and Frank Smith to host this panel, and I'm really excited to be here. Just to start us off, I'm wondering if each of our panelists could just give a short introduction saying who they are, what school they're with, and if you'd like a fun fact about you. So I'm going to start with Emunah.
Hi everyone, I'm Emunah. I'm from McMaster University, representing Maccess. A fun fact about me is that my name is an anagram for the word humane.
That is very cool. And I should have mentioned, I use she, her pronouns. And if anybody wishes, as you're introducing yourself, feel free to include those as well. Okay, Lauren, you're next.
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Lauren. I am here representing the University of Western Ontario, or Western as most people call it. And I'm the accessibility coordinator of their undergrad students council, which is really great. Fun fact about me, I am a twin. I also use she, her pronouns.
Amazing. And Alisha.
Hi everyone, my name is Alisha. I use they, them pronouns. I'm here from the University of Toronto. I'm the co-chair and treasurer of Students for Barrier-Free Access, which is a disability justice group on the campus. And a fun fact about me is I just started this incredibly difficult knitting pattern that I'm like working my way through, and I'm very excited about it.
Congratulations, Alisha. That's wonderful. And last but certainly not least, Sophie.
Representing the University of Victoria or the Society for Students with Disability. A fun fact about me, I'm a biology major, so I have freckles, which is dominant, but I have red hair, which is recessive. So I thought that was interesting.
That is very interesting. Thank you so much, everyone. We really wanted to do this event today to share some of the great work that student leaders are doing, because one of the things that we've seen throughout the pandemic is the power of student leaders. So at Western, for example, with the Society of Graduate Students, where I'm the Accessibility Commissioner, we've done a lot of work around making sure that return to campus is safe and making sure that people who can return, want to return, are able to safely, but also for people that may not want to return, that they're able to continue classes remotely. And so I thought that this event would be really important to hear from our student leaders a little bit about their organizations, about the good work they're doing, and also a little bit about some of the maybe challenges that student leaders have faced and how student leader organizations or student-led organizations are different than accessible learning. So to kick us off, our first question, can you tell us a little bit about your organization? And so I think I'm going to start with Lauren.
Hi, everybody. I, like I said, am a representative of Western University's University Student Council. So that's where my organization comes in. It's the University Student Council Accessibility Committee. So we are very related to them. And sorry, what was the rest of the question?
Can you tell us a little bit about your organization and the role it plays on campus?
Right, okay, thank you. The role it plays on campus is that we really try to take feedback from students directly, and we try to bring that forward to the Students' Council so that we can make more systemic, more broader changes to help students with disabilities. But we also try to do like action on the ground on campus, working with events and educational initiatives to teach students what their rights are and about the resources that are available to them at Western. And then we also try to do a bit of a social component as well for our disabled students, especially first-year disabled students, because we want them to feel connected to the Western community and to enjoy their time on campus. So that's it for us.
So that's really interesting. You mentioned a social component for students with disabilities in their first year. What does that look like?
Yeah, so that's a very new thing that I am spearheading this year, which I'm very excited about. Basically, we're going to be connecting with all of the different campus clubs, or as many as want to partner with us, and trying to host social events with that club, but also inviting students with disabilities, making it a very accessible event, very social, very fun. So just so they are exposed to other clubs, which is great, and they have that opportunity to be in that disability friendly space. Often when you think about campus clubs as a person with a disability, you think, oh, well, is the room accessible? Is there, space for me to get in on my mobility device, for example, like all these questions. So we will take care of all that and really host those like more social events. So I'm excited about it.
That's really wonderful. Emunah, tell us a little bit about your organization and the role it plays on your campus.
Sure. So Maccess is essentially a peer support, advocacy, and community building service on campus, run entirely by and for McMaster students who experience disability, chronic illness, mental health concerns, neurodivergence, and other forms of inaccessibility on campus. So it's a peer support model, which means like we're run entirely by and for disabled folks. And we offer different kinds of services. So in terms of peer support, we have kind of a drop-in space. So before COVID, that worked as like a physical room on campus, and now it's an online chat space through Discord. We also offer one-to-one peer support services and weekly community support groups. And in addition to that, we have events that are both educational and just fun. And we do some advocacy work to the administration and also through our social media. Yeah, the goal of Maccess is really to build and maintain a campus environment that not only includes folks with disabilities, but actively kind of celebrates, supports, and values disability on our campus community.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And Sophie.
Just moving rooms. I have a busy house today.
Oh, no problem at all. The perks of COVID, right? We all have to be flexible.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your patience. So the Society for Students with a Disability, we Victoria Student Society. So we do differ a little bit. Like Emunah said, we are also a organization run for and by students with disabilities. So we do a lot of grassroots-led peer-to-peer support. We're more focused on direct. We focus on social, educational, and sort of act as a resource center. And as far as the social support goes, which is, I think, the only thing on campus that really offers social supports for those with disabilities, is that, yeah, they can find like-minded individuals, and we have weekly programs.
Sophie, I don't know if you're finished or if you're just cutting out. You're cutting out a little bit.
I'm probably cutting out. Let me move back to the room and kick the other people out of that room.
So maybe we'll move on to Alisha.
Sure, yeah. So like I was saying, I am the co-chair of Students for Barrier-Free Access. We are a group funded by student tuition. So there's a portion of their fees that go to us. And so we sort of do like some of the other groups I've been saying with the skills building, community building events. We do a lot of workshops with the goal, I think explicitly, of creating like community alternatives to things. So we've been doing like crisis intervention workshops or like spaces to sort of encourage and develop self-advocacy skills in our members. In addition to that, we run advocacy campaigns like towards the administration on specific issues, but also we've been asked a lot to consult on accessibility policies from the administration. People just kind of come to us as the people who know stuff. And so we try to spread that knowledge as much as we can, but with this particular caveat that they should be using it the way that advances disability justice rather than, you know, just kind of puts the name of equity on things. And so like working on those relationships with other groups is a large part of what we do.
That's really interesting. Can you like maybe expand a little bit on that? Like when you talk about sort of infusing a disability justice lens into policy, what does that look like? Because I think you're right. I think a lot of times we put EDI labels on policies, or even say we're going to incorporate EDI into curriculum, but we don't actually do it. So I'd be really interested to just hear a little bit more about that disability justice lens.
Yeah. So it comes in like I guess I'll say two forms. So first is people who just kind of want to check a box for consultation. Like, yeah, we like consulted with the people for accessible events, but you know, they're consulting us 3 days before the event and not working it into the actual planning process. And so that would be something that we would probably refuse and be like, if you want to talk to us next time, like, then we can have that discussion and we can work accessibility from the beginning into the event. The other kind of thing that we talk about a lot is when the policy itself might be contrary to disability justice. So, for example, requests for, I'm trying to not identify too much, but we've had requests for people wanting to talk about like eligibility criteria for financial supports for disability. And we're not, like, instead of like we'll invite the discussion about why we need eligibility and like what that means to them and that kind of thing, and advise at that point. So yeah, I think the main thing is that we want to be involved from the beginning and not at the end. And we sort of really want people to take the time and think about why they're asking us to do certain things and like what the consultation means for them and like what they're trying to get out of things, to make it as the most meaningful consultation possible.
Yeah, and you know, I think that's a really important point. Like even with accessibility, building it in at the beginning when a program's being developed or, you know, a platform is being built is a lot easier than obviously going back and having to retrofit. And then at that point, you're spending a lot of money and time trying to make something accessible rather than doing it from the start. So I think that's a really important point you've brought up. We've all kind of, you know, known that COVID has thrown a monkey wrench in plans, but return to campus is for some people really exciting, but very anxiety producing for other people, especially for folks who may not feel safe going back in large scale environments. So I'm just wondering what each of your organizations is planning to do to make return to campus, whether that be in person or virtual, inclusive and accessible. And maybe I'll start with Sophie. And Sophie, if there was anything kind of from the last question that you wanted to throw in, you can feel free to start with that, since I know you were breaking up a little bit.
Sure. I hope this works a little bit better.
You sound great. You sound fantastic.
Thank you so much. So once again, I'm calling in from the Society for Students with a Disability, and we are a peer run, so run by students for students with disabilities, and we do a lot of social education or even advocacy work. And so come this fall, we'll be focusing a lot on our advocacy work. And so far, we have a campaign called #AccessForAll. So same name as this panel. And what
cool.
we're advocating for is that for students who are otherwise unable to attend classes in person, be able to attend them online and also actively participate in materials online, lectures online, discussions, everything from the comfort of their own accessible space, possibly even remotely. So this would hopefully benefit those with chronic pain, mobility issues, sensory overload.
And again, I don't know if you're done, Sophie, but it did cut out at sensory overload. So I'm not sure. Oh, there you go. You're back.
Yeah, sorry about that. My Wi-Fi is terrible. So once again, our campaign Access for All is advocating for students to be able to attend classes online if they're otherwise unable to attend in person. And so this is started from a small campaign and become quite a lot bigger than just a couple of grassroots sort of organization. We're trying to campaign our MLAs and even work up to a provincial level.
That's fantastic. Lauren, what about you? What is USC doing to make the return to campus as inclusive and accessible as possible?
Well, I think this is a really great question. And
Thank
I feel like things have really changed so much because of COVID. And I think it's really going to change the way that we as universities operate really for, I think, the foreseeable future and potentially many years to come. When it comes to making things more inclusive and accessible, we as a committee have decided that all of our events are going to be both in person and have a Zoom option. So that people who are more comfortable with the Zoom option, the online stuff, potentially immunocompromised or have difficulty making it to campus can still participate. And that's something that I feel really passionately about because we don't know everybody's situation and we want to be as inclusive as possible. We are, trying our best when it comes to guiding the administration towards continuing the hybrid model where classes would have both the in-person but also someone monitoring the Zoom, because I've just received a lot of emails. I'm sure, well, I don't know if you guys have been getting emails about stuff like this, but I've gotten a lot about students who really want the hybrid model, but it's not being offered. So we are going to be liaising with the administration and trying to get that more offered, and making sure that accommodations aren't rolled back is something that we're very passionate about as well, because I know that this pandemic was in some ways kind of an opportunity for people to have a lot more accommodations that they'd wanted but had never had before, like captioning and videos. So we're just trying to make sure that all of that stuff is still available for our incoming students as well as our older students. And that's basically our plan.
It's fantastic. Thank you. And I think you're right. In some ways, Zoom has really leveled the playing field because of things like captioning and being able to come in remotely. But it's also, created barriers for people who may not have strong Wi-Fi or who may not have a really strong laptop. So I think that the sort of hybrid model has a lot of potential. Absolutely. Emunah, what about Maccess? I always want to say Mac Access, but it's Maccess. What's your plan for an inclusive and accessible return to campus, be that virtual or in person?
Yeah, don't worry. Everyone calls it Mac Access, even within our university. So it's a common one. So I kind of just approaching it again from the peer support community and advocacy streams. From a peer support perspective, we're really trying to train our volunteers about COVID-related inaccessibility, return to campus, how COVID has impacted folks differently depending on disability status and other forms of social location. So we're really just trying to create an environment where folks are able to come get peer support from our volunteers and from our executive team about difficulties with return to campus, whether that be disability related, mental health related, like any of those kinds of things. And then from a community perspective, because we have such a strong disability community on campus, it offers a really good opportunity to collectivize concerns. So if there's like one person who's dealing with an issue and they come to Maccess and are talking about it, and there's other folks who also are dealing with that, it kind of gives us the opportunity to recognize that as a larger institutional barrier and work towards fixing that from an advocacy perspective. So that's, working with administrations to bring forth the disability student concerns. Something that we did was there was a McMaster back to campus town hall where folks were able to kind of ask questions and talk to the administration about how that's happening. So we really kind of pushed the students involved in Maccess to be able to go to have disability voices represented. And again, kind of like other folks were saying, pushing for accommodations that existed last year to stay available. We are only offering online services for the first little while until we see how things progress on campus. But contingency planning to be flexible as things shift and progress.
I really like the idea of a back to campus town hall. Was that something initiated by Maccess, or was that something initiated by the university that Maccess supported and promoted?
That was something initiated by the university, and we just kind of tried to advertise specifically to disabled folks to go to that and kind of make sure that our voices and our questions were answered.
That's fantastic. And do you feel that they were, based on kind of what you heard after the town hall and just during the town hall?
I think definitely folks went out and presented their concerns. If it was listened to by the administration, I think is a different, larger question.
See game for sure.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And Alisha, what about Students for Barrier-Free Access? What's being done there to ensure a safe and accessible and inclusive return to campus?
Yeah, so in the before times, we had a drop-in space and a computer lab and like an accessible computer lab and everything. And so we're actually in the middle of a move. So when we return back, we actually won't be in our old space. So we're starting afresh in a new building, which means that we have to coordinate the building for COVID safety. So we're trying to push at because it's run by our student union. And so we're trying to start the conversation of like, even though, the university may not have certain guidelines or the restrictions may be lifted, like consider keeping the restrictions in because our members are among the most vulnerable for COVID related complications and that kind of thing. And so like starting that conversation in joint health and safety committee meetings. Otherwise, we are having our AGM online because it's a big meeting. And also it just seems easier than having to coordinate with hybrid and online. Like I know a lot of, and in my personal capacity, I've been doing a lot of talking to like administration and my faculty and things like that to, again, I think somebody said like prevent rolling back accommodations, which is like happening with alarming frequency. I think also something that's been coming up is that a lot of faculty don't actually want to do hybrid because it makes the pedagogy kind of weird. To that end, and like I kind of agree. I've heard members sort of say, like people with hearing difficulties, that it's hard to hear somebody talking in an in-person class over Zoom. And there's no captioning involved. There's no like recording allowed in our faculties. So that's something to consider. And so we are sort of trying to get as online as possible, also because it's not the safest considering we don't have like limited capacity in our classrooms anymore. Like it's full capacity, no social distancing, that kind of thing.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah. But the hybrid model, I think, is really an interesting question because I think Osgood is actually hiring people, at least in their law faculty. I'm not sure elsewhere, but they're hiring people to come in and support the hybrid model thing. So like professors don't have to monitor both the Zoom in their class. The support person will be able to do that, which I think is something that we can maybe consider pushing for broadly. The universities have enough money, and so ideally, like when, fingers crossed, if everything's fine, we do move in, we'll probably have like limited capacity in our computer lab. We recognize that it's a really important space because we also allow people who are just like community members who like may not be currently registered students, et cetera, to use our space. And that's really important. And so we still have to have it. We're working at exactly how, but maybe some sort of appointment system, reduced capacity. What I'm trying to say is we want to extend COVID limitations much farther than what's safe for like the normal population, because we're not the normal population. And I think that's been at the forefront of our organizing around this.
That's yeah, and I think that that some of those questions around recording and lectures are old questions that keep coming up, and COVID sort of resolved them. I often find that there's a lot of different organizations, and when I meet with students on campus, one of the things I get asked a lot is, okay, so you're the Accessibility Commissioner. How is this different from accessible education? And then there's the accessibility committee. So I think there's a lot of organizations that overlap and do very similar work. So for example, I know at Western, accessible education does do some advocacy, certainly around facilities management, infrastructure, signage. So I wondered if each of you could share how your organization as a student union organization is different than accessible learning or accessible education, depending on what it's called at your school. And is there any areas where maybe you overlap? So maybe we will start this time with Emunah.
Sure. So just for some background, at McMaster, we have a student accessibility services, which focuses mostly on classroom accommodations. We also have a program through the Student Success Center that helps with accessible experiential learning opportunities. So things like volunteer internships, co-ops, placements, things like that. And then there's an equity and inclusion office, which kind of takes claims of misconduct or when folks aren't having their accessibility needs met, or their accommodational needs met. Maccess notably focuses on accessibility, not accommodation. So we're not kind of in the business of trying to accommodate a classroom environment for folks. We're more trying to focus on accessibility in the university in general. And kind of similar to, I think Alisha was talking about, taking a bit of a disability justice perspective as opposed to disability rights. So I guess I would say something that we try to do is address, I guess, like the loneliness of such a decentralized and individualistic accommodation process. I know a lot of students feel like the accommodation system is very much like lonely, like you go and you're not really connected to anyone else, and you just kind of say what your difficulties are or your barriers that you're facing, and those get addressed. So we're trying to kind of root our services in community care and in the idea of peer support. So it's a bit more of a give and take than a service provision. Folks come to build community, and everyone involved kind of gets something out of it, either if they're a volunteer, a community member on the executive team, anything like that. The places where we do overlap is that sometimes we will offer to go with folks to their student accessibility services meetings, or help draft letters to profs if they need help, or if they want someone to look over that. But other than that, I think our help is mostly communal and relational as opposed to practical. And then also kind of taking those concerns and working on a broader level to try and shift things at the university overall. I think notably we have less institutional power and less institutional leverage than a lot of these services, but we are quite community oriented. And again, because we have kind of a community and a collective, sometimes that gives us leverage in that we can say like these 50 students are experiencing this barrier instead of the more kind of individualistic accommodation system.
That's really interesting. So you mentioned something I wanted to just circle back to for a minute. You talked about, the loneliness, the isolation that kind of comes with the individualized accommodation approach. Could you touch on that just a bit more?
Sure. So I think the way that it works at our university is that if you want accommodations, you have to, notably produce medical documentation and meet with I think they're called, I don't remember what the title is, but essentially a staff member at the student accessibility services, and create a plan, which then gets kind of sent to the different professors. And then there's a lot of advocacy that is expected of the student to kind of go to each professor to get those needs met. And it's very much a one-to-one kind of conversation. So it's not really working with professors on a larger level to implement accessibility into the classroom. It's really kind of individually accommodating different students. And I know that students who aren't connected to disability communities on campus can really feel a little bit isolated or ostracized or lonely in that process because they aren't connected with anyone else who's going through it. Even though there are so many students who have accommodations, it can really feel lonely in a way that folks feel like they're the only one experiencing these barriers, that it's all on them to shift the classroom, when actually the goal of the accommodation system isn't to shift the classroom, it's to kind of shift things for each individual student that needs it.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful. And I love that communal and relational. I might steal that, but I will cite my sources. And such great points, Emunah, coming in on the chat. And Sophie, would you mind sharing a little bit about how your organization differs from accessible learning and maybe where there's areas you might overlap?
For sure, yeah. Okay, I'm really hoping my Wi-Fi is fixed now.
No worries.
Okay.
We're all doing the best we can in this virtual world.
Yeah, that's so true. Thank you again. So once again, the SSD, or the Society for Students with a Disability, we're a little bit different from our Center for Accessible Learning on campus in several ways. So first, the SSD is run for and by disabled students, both graduate and undergraduate. And so while we do advocate and connect with those who need academic accommodations, that's not our sole job, or again, we don't have the bureaucratic power to get someone, extra time for an exam, or, some accessible accommodation for taking examinations. That would be the Center for Accessible Learning. So as far as the Center for Accessible Learning, as opposed to the SSD does a little bit more widespread, and I'm going to say community-oriented supports. So we have funding for accessible technology or devices or aids. And that can be, filled out by anyone who just desires an aid or needs an accessible aid for education. We do some housing advocacy. So this summer, actually, we had a family who needed to be on campus. And of course, there's no other department at the University of Victoria that would help them get an accessible space on campus housing. So we did manage to get that family into an appropriate space for them. We run events. So we do panel events. Our latest one was Access for All, about the hybrid or high flex model of attending classes. We do workshops and events. So there's a lot of sort of social peer-to-peer relations, which is really lovely. We do have a food program, and this one's really interesting. It's been running for about a year and a half, almost 2 years now. And so students who are experiencing food insecurity or maybe aren't able to physically go to the grocery store and pick up food themselves, or don't have the funds, there's a lot of overlapping needs here. They can get a delivery of fresh produce and or fruits and vegetables to their door every 2 weeks. And that's a lovely program. We do supply letters to professors who don't follow up on accommodation or accessibility needs. This doesn't happen too often, but we have in the past needed to push a little bit harder, even than the ombudsperson, who is supposedly the first go-to. So of course, we find a lot of people falling through the bureaucratic cracks, if you will. So the ombudsperson actually works through the University of Victoria, and the Center for Accessible Learning also does. And so there's just so many situations, in anyone's life that don't actually have their needs met by these two supports. Another thing that sort of differs with the SSD is that anyone who identifies as having one or more disabilities and who is a student is a member of the SSD. So you don't need a diagnosis to walk in and get supports from us or apply for a funding or a bursary. But that said, we do find that oftentimes we have to connect an individual to UVSS funds or the University of Victoria Student Society funds that are unused, so that they can get diagnosed, because having psychoevaluations are extremely expensive. And so we do a lot of sort of resource hub, holistic type of supports.
That's beautiful. Holistic, communal, relational. We're getting lots of great words to describe our student leaders today. I'm going to go now to Alisha, if I could.
Yeah, so I think a lot of us are sort of working from the same model here. We also kind of are there for like community, for emotional support when going through the accessibility services process. That's our office. Accessibility services also, like the other campuses, only really focuses on academic accommodations and not extracurricular, but also universal design kind of thoughts. And so something like the remote access is something that we've been talking about outside the disability community and outside of accessibility services to like the broader campus administration to sort of get that for all students. We also don't require people to identify on like a medical basis. We accept anybody who says they have a disability. The other thing that I think we're doing is working on our like collaborations and outreach for other campus groups, because our events, we try to have them accessible as possible, but all the other events are not. And so we want to start the conversation in other spaces that aren't necessarily thinking about accessible events and disability. Yeah.
It's fantastic.
And I think in terms of the overlap, like we do, accessibility services has a lot of the same sort of like programming that we do, but I feel like it's different coming from a student body rather than the administration's office. I was really also interested to hear about the other groups, like ways that they hold the accessibility services accountable. Like we're trying to do that on a policy change, but there's actually no enforcement mechanism for any accommodations requests like at all. And so that's something that I've also been working on in my personal capacity. And then the other thing I'll say is that as far as like holding accountable goes, we don't just talk about academic accommodations and holding them accountable to that, but also we've done a bit of consulting on like the crisis management policies and like the way that the campus will assess risk in a student and those kinds of management policies of the university. And so, yeah.
I'm just wondering if you could touch a tiny bit more on, how you mentioned risk and assessing risk, and if you could just unpack that for us a little bit more, Alisha, if you'd be comfortable doing that.
Yeah. So the university actually has 2 consultations going on right now, one about the mandated leave of absence and one about the role of campus police on they call special constables now. They rename themselves on campus. And so we've been doing like private consultations, but also like larger, I want to say educational kind of stuff, or like I've been talking to a lot of students and like trying to get them to articulate what they already know to be true, if that makes sense. Like everybody knows that cops should not be on campus, but they don't necessarily know how to like provide that feedback to the university in a way that makes sense. And so we're like facilitating that conversation. A lot of the COPS one started in the summer, but the mandated leave started in March and it's going to resume again in September. And so we're sort of right now like ramping up our efforts to like start that again. And yeah.
That's great. And Lauren, how does your organization differ from accessible education? I know that's what it's called at Western, and maybe where are the areas that maybe things overlap a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, accessible education at Western is really accommodation focused. They are looking for that medical documentation. They are kind of setting you up with that counselor who isn't really much of a counselor. They really just like read your documents and then they give you whatever the accommodations they think that you need are. So then if you need further accommodations or if you need more, you always have to go back and liaise with that person, which can be a bit annoying. But we're really not accommodation focused at all. Really, it's like what you guys, our wonderful other speakers, were saying. We're really a community group. We're a relational group. You know, as much as we are within the Students' Council, so we're a bit more formal in that way, we really are meant to be a committee in the sense of like kind of a club, a group of friends. I mean, when I joined the committee last year, I was one of only 2 disabled people on the committee, and there was like at least 20 people on the committee-ish when you include the subcommittee. So this year I was like, that's the wrong take. We got to be by and for disabled people. So we've really increased the amount of disabled people on our committee. We only have 12 people on the committee, and I'm very proud to say that 7 identify as disabled, which is really a lot more of what we're striving for. I mean, I think accessible learning, accessible education is very much not populated by the disabled community, at least at Western. It just seems to be people with a much more academic focus. So we're moving away from that in our work. And, you know, we are kind of an advocacy group as well, in a sense, because we are bringing those concerns that students have forward to the Students' Council, which is something that the accessible learning does not do. Accessible learning is very much like one person prove their needs, like really you have to justify everything yourself for them, and then they'll like give you whatever the standard kind of legal thing that they could give you in terms of having an accommodation. But we're like much broader advocacy. We're talking about like, you know, making things accessible on campus, not just physically, but in terms of structural barriers. We're going to do an education series talking about attitudinal barriers, which can be a huge problem. And then we also try to take the reins and we try to take the lead with making sure students with disabilities feel comfortable on campus. Like we created a handbook last year that I'm really proud of, that has a lot of information about disability and resources, but it also has information for allies about, you know, what terms should you use, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, stuff like that. So we're handing those out this year, which I'm very excited about. I think they're going to be a great way to kind of start the conversation. Can I link to the handbook? I see that in the chat. Can I link to the handbook? I can. I don't know if I can put it. Do you want me to put it in the chat? Or
yeah, if you're comfortable with that, Lauren, that would be great. Because I was actually just going to say to you, I'd love to see that. What a great idea! And I think terminology is so it's so difficult, and it's laced with a lot of complexities around what word to use and when and how. So I love that there's a section in there for allies, and I think it's really important to have something specifically around disability and accessibility, as opposed to just an overall handbook, because there are some unique resources on campus that people might not know about. So that's fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to reading that myself. Maybe I'll learn something as a second year PhD student. Who's had many years at Western, but I still will read the handbook. You know, I for a lot of COVID, I was thinking about the things that had to be in place to learn, and how some of those accommodations pre-pandemic were not granted or were not possible. We've heard about, you know, remote classes, recording of classes today. And I'm wondering from our panelists, you know, our final question, if you could talk a little bit about any accommodations you saw during COVID that worked really well that you'd like to see continue. Because I think if we've learned anything from the pandemic, it's that we can work remotely. And in fact, we're probably more productive because we don't have anywhere to jump up and go at 5 o'clock, which isn't always a good thing either. It shouldn't be about productivity. But that these things can and do work. And they've actually, for some of us, made us less isolated. I often think about my own story where I don't live in London, and this year I joined several committees and was really engaged and met lots of friends because I could do it from Zoom. So I'm wondering if maybe we could start with Sophie and just, is there anything in terms of accommodations that we've seen through the pandemic that you'd like to see continue?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. So mainly for the hybrid access for, classes or academic sort of materials, including lectures or participatory methods, that's been so much more accessible for a large portion of our demographic. And I hope that we can see that going forward. The University of Victoria does have some online classes, but the extent to which that there are online options is not, it's not very good, or it's not very universal, unfortunately. So I hope that we can continue to advocate for that and go higher up, actually go to the Association of BC Students and advocate on a provincial level for that. Other things that have been more accessible is, as many people have touched on, actually the social areas of life. So for lots of our demographic, we have a lot of socially isolated individuals who are maybe first years or sort of lost between, maybe they're not 18 years old, but they're in first year, or they've taken, 5 or 6 or 7, 8 years to complete their degree, and they're looking for continued connection. So we have a lot of isolated individuals, and I think the shift to COVID has actually been honestly really nice for a lot of people, because they've been able to access online social occasions, and that's just been the norm rather than that be the exception. Now that everybody needs to, take into account COVID and precautions, everybody is accepted online, and that's been really great. I will just say that not everybody has benefited from this online shift. A lot of people with attentional stuff or, other things going on, they do prefer and benefit more from in-person classes. And so this is why I hope that the SSD, and I know that we will, continue to strongly advocate for a high flex or a hybrid education at the University of Victoria. And that will involve a lot of accountability. And I don't want to, steal the thunder away from you about discussing accountability, but I'm happy to go into it if we want. Other than that, I think lots of door-to-door deliveries has been really accessible for people.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so continuing our food program, even despite everything going back to fully in person, the food program's really great. We're doing some online supports, as well as in-person supports. So we're trying to accommodate both people who benefit from in-person sort of events or workshops or, support groups, and online support groups.
That's great. Thank you. Lauren's going to email me the PDF and we can get that out to everybody for the accessibility handbook. And Sophie, those are such good points. I'm certainly a favor of door-to-door delivery because of my disability. And I think you're right. There's so many things that helped, but there's certain things we have found that have hurt. Okay. And Emunah, would you like to share a little bit about accommodations that you thought, that's worked really well? I'd like to see it continue.
Yeah, I think something that's been a weird positive is that we have a really good argument right now for accessibility. I think in the past, when disabled folks have asked for really a lot of things, they were kind of told that it was impossible. And all of a sudden, when COVID hit and non-disabled folks were experiencing similar kinds of barriers that disabled folks have been experiencing for years, all of a sudden it was possible. And there were really quick and creative solutions to the issues that disabled folks have been dealing with for years. So things like captions, online and recorded lectures, alternate options for assignments, all of those just kind of materialized really quickly, which is something that we can and will be using to leverage our asks, and to kind of show like you can't claim that this is impossible anymore. Like when you're motivated, and when it impacts people that you consider like important or worth caring for, then it gets done. So some things that have been helpful again are captions and remote access to lectures, as well as recorded lectures. Something that's been really great has been McMaster had a lot of like modified or alternate options for assignments, and a general sense of flexibility, I think. And something that a lot of folks noticed was that testing was a lot more based on application instead of memory, because things were in an online format, which folks really appreciated, especially those who have memory-related difficulties. I think something that was interesting was that because of online lectures and the ability to turn off your camera, I know some folks felt more comfortable because they didn't have to be visibly disabled or visibly marginalized in other ways. And that was like especially helpful, I think, for folks in engaging with like office hours or one-to-one communication with professors. But again, yeah, like other folks were mentioning, it is a bit of a trade-off. There are still barriers to the online environment. I think it's a mistake to just kind of think that making it an online environment is an accessible environment. I know digital accessibility is like a whole thing that we really need to work on as a university and across
absolutely.
universities for
Oh,
sure.
yes, cross everything.
Yes,
for sure.
But I think, yeah, it's a bit of a, I think that the thing to emphasize is that there needs to be options. Like the thing that folks really appreciated, even if one thing didn't work for them, was that there was a general spirit of flexibility this past year, and folks are feeling that kind of slip away. We're really kind of trying to push to make sure that that stays, and to show like if we can do it last year, we can do it for the next years. And just because it now like quote unquote only impacts disabled folks is not a reason to stop.
Yeah, well said. Very well said. And Lauren.
Hi, yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I really felt like everything that was said is kind of how I feel as well about this. I mean, I've heard a lot from people saying that there has been constant asks for things like captions on videos. I mean, even Emily really had to fight to get captions on videos and Zoom this year with COVID. And the fact that it's just been something that so many people with disabilities have asked for, and it was totally ignored the whole time that they asked for it because it was too expensive or too much work to implement. And, you know, now that we've seen that it can be implemented, and now we're really seeing where the bias lies in that, you know, they implemented it when they needed it for the able-bodied people to attend school. But now that, I mean, it's just like it was said, now that people with disabilities need it, there's no interest anymore in providing those services because they just don't want to deal with it. And I mean, I think that's an overarching theme. And I think that's something that my committee work is really focused on, is the idea that, you know, people with disabilities, accommodating them shouldn't be a choice. It should be something that you do because they have the same rights as you. They have the same, you know, desires as you and wants to get a good education, to be the best student they can be. And, you know, just reminding people of the humanity behind the requests that are being made for these accommodations. Exactly, like I see it in the chat here, addressing attitudinal barriers must be central for these reasons. And that's absolutely like 100% what we're about, is addressing those attitudinal barriers, because it's if you don't change the attitude, you can pass as many laws as you want and nothing's ever going to get better, because if people don't have the attitude of respect and they don't have that as the starting basis, then they're just going to find loopholes to everything that we ask them to do. So you have to start things off on a more equal footing, and that starts with addressing those barriers.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I think we're kind of seeing some things rolled up or rolled back that were so helpful. And Alisha, to end us off.
Yeah, a lot of great points. I'll start with the stuff that we have seen that we would like to continue. I mean, obviously online classes and more flexible recording is like great, wonderful. Not all departments have allowed recording, like even now.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm in the law faculty and they just will not like budge. And that's getting rolled back at alarming frequency. So just kind of saying like we are actually still in a pandemic and we still actually need to have online classes is like a political statement on our campus. And so we're dealing with that. But something that we've seen otherwise, I think somebody said, I think it was Emunah, said that tests were more focused on application. I loved my open book exams. That was fantastic. I know that there are some privacy concerns with ExamSoft, like metadata has been used in disciplinary proceedings. So, you know, like there's two sides of things, but I love open book exams. It feels like they're going to go back to the in-person closed book thing this semester, which is not great. And then just generally like the flexibility and extensions and deadlines and alternate assignments, but also on an institutional level, at least at the St. George campus. I'm reasonably certain that the other two, the Mississauga and the Scarborough campuses, they didn't require a verification of illness form for absences. I'm not exactly sure how that worked for exam deferrals, but for general, like, I can't be here for this thing, you could get your documentation and do that like afterwards, and there was more flexibility that way. It wasn't required that you had to get the VOI, which was wonderful. Something that somebody else said is that now, like, we've been asking for these things for a while, and now when we're going back to return, everything only like impacts disabled folks. Something that's come up on our campus a lot, I think, now is like intersecting grounds of discrimination. So religion was always an issue, like people scheduling tests on religious holidays and things like that. Like that's always been a thing. And I think that's coming up more, but in particular, I mean family status accommodations, especially for parents who have children who they'll have to stay home with for 2 weeks and then don't have remote access for their classes. And specifically here, we're realizing that there is no separate established track for getting accommodations on family status or like association with a disabled person. So like somebody in your family is particularly vulnerable. And so we're trying to like hold the administration accountable to what is actually their legal responsibility, which you would think would be much easier. But again, the attitudinal barriers is not really a thing. The other problem here is that the legal responsibilities here go back to the Human Rights Code, not the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act. And we have an office for the AODA. So we have somewhere we can actually take those complaints. But again, there's no separate avenue for that. Just another note on the, like, you can pass as many laws as you want. The deadline for the AODA is 2025, which is the deadline for them to like fully implement all their accessible like regulations and things like that. And so I feel like attitudinal barriers are going to be like a whole thing that we then like we integrate the COVID conversation and like you've done this already, and kind of reflecting on that. But I think it'll be a focus going forward for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Sana, for that email address. Certainly, I will be in touch, and I'm sure other student leaders will be. I know that we are actually over time, but I just wondered, first and foremost, I want to thank our panelists. This was fantastic. I just want to open it up, though, to see if any of our audience has questions. Either pop them in the chat or you can speak them out loud. I know we're over time, but I do want to give our audience an opportunity, if our panelists don't mind, just staying around for 2 or 3 more minutes to answer a question or two. It's always a good sign when you go over. I saw something in the chat from Sana, but I think that's just an email. Janique. Yeah, thank you. So Janique's just putting some instructions there. Maybe while we're thinking of our questions, I'll just once again thank Emunah, Lauren, Alisha, and Sophie for being such wonderful panelists today. Yes, you have a question?
Sorry, I see that somebody with the name of Heather raised their hand for a question.
Go ahead, Heather. Sorry, I'm so sorry, Heather. Now I'm hearing it. Okay, my apologies. I wasn't trying to ignore you.
No worries. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to the panelists as well. I think there's really good points made and discussion. I actually have a question for the panel. So I am in an administrative position. I work as the accessibility coordinator at Ryerson under the Office of the Vice President, Equity and Community Inclusion. I'm also a wheelchair user. And one of the big challenges that I've had is connecting with students with disabilities. I am not connected to the office that provides academic accommodation. We're separate, and we have tried to go through with them to connect with students with disabilities, and they're not interested in doing that for privacy reasons and some other good reasons. So we did have a student engagement group happening over the last 5 years, but it's a very small number of students. With that group, though, we created something we called an access tour, which is providing a tour for students with mobility disabilities and showing them how to get around campus in the most barrier-free way. That was one of the things that group did. What is the best way to reach out to disabled students?
I'll just let any panelist jump in. We won't go kind of one by one. We'll just, anybody can jump in and offer Heather some words of wisdom.
Hi, Heather.
Hello.
Lauren here. I think that's an excellent question that you've posed. And we too, as the USC Accessibility Committee, have also struggled with engagement, just having a hard time getting the word out to students what we're about and, about our events. So we've had some lower engagement maybe than we've wanted in the past, but I'm really pushing to change that. So I'm just going to tell you the tips and tricks we're using this year. And, if they're helpful to you, I hope they are. And if not, I'm sorry about that. But the big thing we're doing to try to get more engagement is really reaching out to other groups. As I said, we're trying to do social things with other campus groups. So if you want to reach out to maybe other areas of the administration or even to other student groups with like a bit of information and ask to have a chat, and then you could get people directed to you that way, maybe a little bit more engagement that way. If it's something they were already interested in, for another reason, and you can kind of piggyback on that and get some engagement. And then the other big thing is social media, which I'm sure everybody is, mixed feelings about that, but it is a good way to reach a big group quickly. And, it's nice to be able to just share information with a large crowd on there. So we do that. Other than that, I don't really have any other suggestions, but I hope that helps.
We actually started a new group just before COVID hit in partnership with the student societies. So each faculty has a student society. And that's really working. And also it's a group that has evolved over the last 2 years that is both students and staff together, so who are concerned about engagement and support of students with disabilities. And so we've gotten a number of students involved, but very few students who actually experience disability themselves. So that is something that we are doing. Also, we have an equity group. There's a disabled student equity group as part of the student union. So we're trying to partner with them as well. But those are great suggestions. Thank you.
And Emunah, I see that you have raised your hand. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Just kind of off the top of my head, something that comes up with us a lot is language around disability, and just kind of recognizing the different kinds of barriers to folks identifying with the term disability or as disabled. So in all our kind of like volunteer hiring or even around our events, we usually include like a little blurb on the event that explains what we mean when we say disability and kind of just lists out the things that we include under that, and specifically noting like we don't require anyone to have a diagnosis, we accept self-diagnosis, all of that kind of thing. I think that's been really helpful in engaging with folks who otherwise wouldn't necessarily consider themselves part of the disability community, but do experience an accessibility on campus. And then something else that we do is kind of try and have lots of different kinds of events and groups. So we'll have some groups that are based on different disability identities, some groups that are based on, like being queer and disabled or being a person of color and disabled, but also things that are not necessarily about disabilities. So we just have maybe like a group about like dating and disability, or events where just folks can come and like show their pet or their plant, which kind of allows us to access folks who aren't necessarily comfortable with or ready to engage with disability in a group, or identify with that language, but still want access to that community where they feel kind of accepted. Yeah, and then I think online we've had to kind of move away from measuring engagement by quantity and more towards quality. So if we have a pretty small turnout, but people are engaged and seem to be enjoying what they're learning, we consider that event a success, because like at the end of the day, people are tired. We're in Zoom meetings all day long. And yeah, I think it's not necessarily about the number of people that we reach, it's about like the goals that we hit.
Great point. And I hear you on the language. I mean, I say I use person with a disability and disabled person interchangeably. I identify as a disabled person. I ascribe to the social model of disability, but unless you're familiar with that concept, people don't get it. And, they're throwing around, differently abled and really problematic terms to me.
Yes, I'm laughing because I had to gently correct somebody this week at Western around differently abled and why it was offensive.
And yet, at the same time, people have the right to name themselves what they want to name themselves. But yeah. I still want to educate people. But that, that would be a whole other hour-long webinar.
All right, Heather,
one,
let's get together. I think you and I should do a webinar. Excellent.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea.
Any other panelists want to comment or any last questions? I am mindful of time, especially our panelist time. So I think I'll give one last comment or question and then I will wrap up. Online info. Perfect. Janique, do you want to read that out? And we'll make that our last comment.
So this is what it says from Sophie Papp. So I would recommend online in-person infographics explaining what your committee/organization does. Sometimes people don't know that they can reach out or for what they can reach out for.
That's fantastic. Yes, so with that, I think we will wrap. I just want to thank everyone for coming today. I want to remind everyone to follow us on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and certainly this recording will be sent out and is going to be available for everyone who registered today. So feel free to look out for that. And thank you to our audience members and our panelists and my co-facilitators and co-hosts today, Carly and Janique and Frank. So with that, I think we will stop the recording.